Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. So we still have a lot of people coming into this webinar. So let's just give them a minute, and then we will start. Okay, I think we can start. So first and foremost, Happy New Year to everybody. Welcome to this webinar. So if you have been following this webinar since last year, we have been talking about the tiered preparedness and response. Basically, we were considering the toolbox under the tiered preparedness and response, or the TPR. So for today, what we're going to do, or what we're going to discuss, is about the toolbox with regards to the environmental impact assessment. More specifically, we would like to know what are the tools that could be used to assess the impacts of an oil spill to the environment. So before that, let me first introduce myself. My name is Norman Lorica Ramos. I am a principal consultant and trainer for OSRL. I am based in Singapore, so basically in Asia Pacific. So my been 9 years, going 10 years this year for working for OSRL. And most of my experience on impact assessment, environmental impact assessment, is on marine and inland. More specifically on inland, wherein before I before I worked for OSRL, I did a lot of work for this remediation of soil and groundwater. So there's a lot of this sampling and monitoring that I have done prior to joining OSRL. So as I have mentioned, for today, we would like to understand the toolbox with regards to the environmental impact and assessment. So more specifically on monitoring and sampling. So in a spill, basically there are some important questions that we need to ask that would have an effect on understanding the impact of an oil spill to the environment. So some of the main questions that needs to be asked and needs to be answered when we are responding is, first and foremost, is what got spilled. Definitely the type of oil that spilled would have a different sort of impact to the environment. So say, for example, a persistent oil versus a non-persistent oil, it would have a different impact to the environment. How much was spilled? So volume, of course, would have an impact. The amount of oil that was released would have an impact to the environment. Where does it go? When does it get there? Definitely an important question to understand. Whether a sensitive area will be affected or will be impacted, and of course, more importantly, understanding when it will be impacted. Who does it impact? So looking at the social context of the oil spill, which communities will be impacted, any businesses that will be impacted with regards to the spill. So these are also an important question to be answered. What is impacted? So basically, we're looking into the sort of environment, the sort of ecology that would be impacted by the oil spill. And last question, an important question, is what should be done about it? So question on what should be done about it is the tools, the things that we could do in order for us to minimize the impact to the environment. So I will be, as we know, oil spill has both an impact on the environment and socioeconomics, also on cultural aspect. But for today, we will be focusing mainly on the environmental impact. So as I have mentioned before, the type of oil matters as it impacts the environment, more specifically on the marine organisms. So say, for example, if you have light hydrocarbons that spill, for example, naphtha, gasoline, or diesel, it has a lower viscosity. It's not so persistent as compared to crude oil. However, this type of oil, like hydrocarbons, would be more toxic. It has an acute toxicity to the marine organisms. Contrast to heavier hydrocarbons like crude oil, HFO, IFO, and emulsions, they have a higher viscosity, they have an increasing persistence, and its effect to the more specifically to the wildlife. So say, as you can see from the photo, an oil bird, it can cause smothering to such organism, and that could be fatal to such organism. So as you can see, depending on the type of oil, like the important question that we mentioned earlier, the type of oil would have different sort of impact to the environment, more so to the marine organisms. So in terms of environmental impacts, we could compartmentalize that into a number of groups. It could have an impact to the offshore habitats, say, for example, plankton and fish. It could have impact to inshore habitats, for example, seagrass, coral, and reptiles. You can also compartmentalize that into birds and mammals, wildlife, basically. So you got your seabirds, reptiles, also, and marine mammals. And of course, shoreline habitats. So different types of shorelines would be impacted differently, and of course, from different types of oil. So let's go through one by one. So in terms of offshore habitats, so normally when you have an oil spill, it could naturally disperse. It could mix downwards up to about 10 meters, and this naturally dispersed oil, could disrupt the food chain because it will have an effect on the plankton. So it will have an effect on, I would say, an acute effect with regards to the food web because the plankton will be affected. In terms of the fish, impacts of fish in open water are quite rare. Normally the fish will just swim in a different direction from the oil, where the oil is heading. However, if the fish are, I would say, in mariculture, wherein the fish are contained within the fish pen, then definitely they are not able to move about, so they could be heavily impacted by an oil spill. So basically, these are the fish that are being cultured, that are in fish pen, and these are normally close to the nearshore areas. In terms of inshore habitats, so you would consider seagrasses, corals. So these are sort of environment or ecology that would be that's highly diverse and productive ecosystems. And seagrasses and corals, they are highly vulnerable to oil dispersion. So it could be natural or through chemical dispersion. So if you have a dispersion, this would highly affect the ecosystem with the coral and the seagrasses. And of course, take note also the shallow water inshore habitats, specifically near the mangrove areas, this could also be affected. Sea turtles, normally sea turtles would be living near shore. And of course, in shoreline, they could also be affected or impacted by the oil spill. As I mentioned, birds and mammals, they could also be affected. So seabirds, these are most vulnerable in open water. So normally what happens is they could be smothered or they could be coated with oil. And once they are coated with oil, they could die off, or this could be fatal because they could die off from hypothermia. Or if they do ingest some of the oil, this could lead to their hemolytic anemia, and of course this could damage their inner organs. In terms of marine mammals, whales, dolphins, they could be affected when they surface to breed. So basically, their blowholes could be blocked by the oil once they surface. Other mammals would include seals and otters. They would also encounter oil, similar to birds. And other aspects of it is this: if the young are covered with oil, the adults may not be able to recognize their young, and then the young would be unable to feed. So these are some sort of the effects of the oil or impacts of the oil to the wildlife. Shoreline impacts, as I have mentioned before, different types of shorelines would have a different, oil would have a different effect to different types of shorelines. So for example, comparing a sandy shoreline compared to mangrove, definitely the impact to the mangrove would be much greater as compared to a sandy shoreline. And as you know, there are different types of shoreline. They vary in sensitivity, and of course, different species would live in different types of shoreline. And I would say the mangroves, mudflats, they would have a much more diverse ecosystem as compared to others. So that's why the effect to them would be much greater as compared to others as well. But in all of this situation, the ecosystem balance in the shorelines are greatly affected. So these are some sort of the things or some sort of the impacts to the environment. Now the question here is, what could we do about it? So there are a couple of things that I would like to introduce to you with regards to the things that we could do with regards to minimizing the impact to the environment. So what are those? So first is, let's talk about sensitivity mapping. Sensitivity mapping, basically what you are doing is try to plot on a map what are the environmentally sensitive and socioeconomic areas that could be affected. This is very helpful because this would provide you some sort of an idea how to prioritize your socioeconomic and environmental assets, and also this would assist you in with regards to having a good idea with regards to the type of response option that you will use depending on the locality or depending on the sensitivity map that you would have. So a couple of things that you would map, as I mentioned, you would like to map the different types of shoreline. For example, as you can see from the slides, there are a number of types of shoreline, and these are sort of in a criteria called environmental sensitivity index. The higher the number, the more sensitive the shoreline. So as you can see, mangrove would be the most sensitive type of shoreline. And by plotting this or by including this on the map, this would provide you an idea which type of shoreline or which type of environmental asset that you would need to prioritize in the event of spill. Other aspect that you need to map out is what we call the socioeconomic assets. So it's not only the environmental assets that you need to map out, it's also important to understand what are the socioeconomic assets that you have so that it will be combined into one sensitivity map. Therefore, it would provide you a good sort of a decision-making tool with regards to which assets you need to prioritize in protecting or saving, in a sense, if you have an oil spill. So this is one of the good tools that you could use in minimizing the impact to your environmental assets. The other tool that I would like to talk about is what we call the monitoring and sampling. So basically, the question now is, why do we need to do, as part of environmental impact assessment, why do we need to do monitoring and sampling, or M&S? So why M&S? A couple of reasons. In the slides, these are, I wouldn't say this is the exclusive list of reasons why you need to do monitoring and sampling, but I would say the main reasons why you need to do is, number one, it is required by the government agency. It's a regulatory requirement. Do monitoring and sampling because by doing that, you would be able to quantify the impact to the environment. By having a good data with regards to the samples that you have collected, it would provide you some sort of quantification of impact, and therefore how much you would put into with regards to effort, with regards to cleaning up such impact or addressing such impact. In terms of shoreline, if a shoreline is affected by an oil spill, doing a monitoring and sampling, you will be able to determine endpoints, when to stop cleaning up or when to stop doing the necessary actions in the shoreline that was affected by oil spill. And of course, part of this is monitoring and sampling is claims and compensation. So by claims and compensation mean how much effort that could be claimed back with regards to cleaning up a certain area that has been impacted by an oil spill. Okay, so let me zoom in to the endpoints. So what do I mean by endpoints with regards to a shoreline? So as we know, endpoints vary in a shoreline. So the question is, how clean is clean? And definitely different countries would view this differently. And I would provide you or give you some examples of how this is done in my examples in Southeast Asia. So say, for example, an endpoint would be presence of background levels of hydrocarbons. So an example of this is they do this in Thailand, wherein if a shoreline is impacted, what they normally do is they look into the shoreline which is clean, not impacted by the oil. They will take a sample for there. from there, and then identify what would be the background level of hydrocarbon. And then the impact, the shoreline that was impacted by oil, what they will do is try to clean it up until it reaches the background levels of hydrocarbon, which was taken from the clean part of the shoreline. So when the concentrations does not exceed the normal background, then this could be deemed an acceptable endpoint for the cleanup. So again, this is done in Thailand. How clean is clean? It could also be a socioeconomic and ecological influence. If excessive cleaning causes more harm than good, so you have to work with the relevant government agencies to really understand how much effort you should put into to ensure that the cleanup would do more good rather than harm. Or it could also be regulatory driven. So by regulatory driven, some governments or some country, they would already set the value that you need to reach so that they can say, or you could say that the shoreline has been cleaned. So set of values set by the regulation to consider the shoreline is clean. So an example of this is in Singapore. So in Singapore, we have a lot of this sandy beach. If you have an oil spill, it is clear in our regulations that a shoreline that has been impacted by oil is deemed clean if the shoreline doesn't have any oil stains, and at the same time there are no stains and there are no visible sort of oil that can be seen on the beach. So these are sort of the two things, and I think one of the other things that they consider is sort of non-detect when they do sampling from the shoreline. It should show non-detect with regards to the hydrocarbons. So this one is for Singapore. So there's already sort of set values that needs to be met when you are cleaning up a shoreline. And most of the time, the decisions on clean, definition of clean needs to be reached by consensus. You have to work through with the relevant government agencies and of course using baseline data. So definitely there's no set definition dependent on location and site-specific circumstances, but more importantly, all of this would be supported by doing a proper monitoring and sampling. So there must be some sort of sampling regime, sampling program that you should establish to ensure that you are able to meet the endpoints required by the relevant government agency. So most of the time, this will be on the shoreline aspects of it, the impacted shoreline. So the last bit that I would like to present is a case study. So this one is sort of a monitoring that they have done. This one is one of the countries that where we responded to. What happened was there's a mangrove area that was affected by a spill. So the source of the spill is a subsea transfer hose damage. This is suspected due to unintended vessel movement. So basically, they were doing some sort of crude oil transfer via the transfer hose, but the vessel moved a bit, which translated to pulling out the hose, and then this resulted into a spill. The type of oil is HFO 180, so I would say this would be a persistent oil, and the volume of the spill is about 6 tons. And this subsea transfer hose is actually near the shoreline, so that's why there's a mangrove shoreline that was affected. So about more than 15 kilometers of shoreline was affected, including mangrove shoreline. So how they did the monitoring and the sampling is through this approach. So what they did was, for the mangrove shoreline that was affected, of course, we work with also at this time, we work with the country's experts on mangrove. So their advice was, we did assess the mangrove shoreline, and then we tried to select and of course did a sequential pruning of oil leaves along the oil band of the tree canopy. So whatever that is heavily oiled, we did assist in pruning the oiled leaves. Pruning was conducted in 2 to 3 days interval to monitor if this approach will affect the regeneration ability of at the prune section. So basically, after we prune, we try to monitor whether what would be the effect into the mangroves, whether it would affect its regeneration ability or whatever. But the point here is making sure that removing the heavily oiled parts of the mangrove. And another recommendation that we have done is between those big mangrove trees, we put a mesh so that what will happen is that whatever oil leaf that will fall off, it will be falling off into the mesh. It will not be falling directly into the water, because once it falls off into the water, the oil on the leaf will greatly affect or would affect the inshore or the waters near the local waters along the mangrove area. So basically, it prevents from oiling the waters in that area. And then this was done. We monitor this so when we left, the government agency assigned somebody who monitored. I think a relevant agency monitored this and continued doing the pruning. And it was deemed successful. So basically, the affected mangrove actually regenerated after a period of months. So they did some sampling as well with regards to the waters along the mangrove area. At the same time, they did monitor the health of the mangrove at that time. So after a couple of months, or about 2 to 3 months, they noticed that the mangrove started regenerating again. So this is a sort of a good example, I would say, of doing some sort of monitoring and sampling of a mangrove that has been affected by or impacted by an oil spill. So this is just a quick, I would say, a quick overview of the tools, or what are the impacts to the environment of the oil spill, and what are the tools that we could use, more specifically monitoring and sampling. And some suggested readings on the next slide. And I guess we have some time to take in some questions. So I think you can, go ahead if you have a question. I think if you have a question, you can type that in the chat box. I'm not sure whether you can use the microphone when asking, so better use the chat box if you have a question.
I can unmute myself. Can you hear me?
Good. Go ahead, sir.
Oh, now, please, can you please expatiate further on the issue of post-impact assessment you normally conducted after the cleanup exercise, or after the sampling and monitoring exercise?
Can you repeat your question, sir?
Do you normally conduct a post-spill impact assessment? Then how do you intend to go about it?
Yes, so basically post-monitoring, sampling, post-monitoring itself should be done. Like for the case of the mangrove that has been affected, so post-monitoring would be having an expert looking at the regeneration rate of the mangrove, see whether it has grown properly after they have done the pruning. So that's one of the things that they could do for the mangrove. So different environment, different ecological area that has been impacted. So you could do different post-monitoring and sampling regimes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
No, thank you, I'm okay.
Yeah. How about for our other participants? Any other questions?
Yeah, good morning. I was wondering, I'm used to sort of looking at oil spill from an offshore perspective. Could you please give us a little bit more information on some of the inshore challenges, such as tides and currents, you know, sort of different habitats that you look at?
Yeah, so challenges would be, for example, restrictions on the type of response options that you could do. So a good example of that is if, for example, you have a shallow water corals, for example, or if you have a seagrass, for example. If you do chemical dispersant, that would be sort of a challenge, because if you use the dispersant, that means the oil would be going down the water column and could or may affect the corals. So this type of challenges exist. So you really have to understand the type of environment that you're working on, so that you will have a good, I would say, a good sort of, when you do a decision, this type of information will provide you a good decision with regards to what type of response option that you would be using. Another example is, of course, if you have a mangrove area, it would be also, if the spill happens to a mangrove area, then definitely you will be restricted on the use of certain response options. So an example of that is use of dispersant. You will not be able to use that because it might affect the habitat that is within the vicinity of the mangrove area. So certainly this sort of challenges exist. More importantly, you really have to do some sort of net environmental benefit analysis or spill impact mitigation analysis to understand what would be the best way to best response option that could be used in this kind of situation. So there's a lot of actually examples. So there's just a few examples that I have given you, but there are a lot of challenges really, more specifically if you are nearing the going inshore or near shore.
Great, thank you. Do you find that sort of more near shore habitats are quite well equipped to remediate themselves? You know, is there in circumstances where, say, mangrove habitat, there's not a lot of cleanup you could do, so but actually they can repair themselves quite well?
Yeah, I would say there are minimal things that we could do. That's where the post monitoring could help us. So basically, if we have to, if we do a minimal cleanup, definitely we have to do some sort of monitoring to ensure that, for example, for the mangrove example that I have given you, it just so that the type of mangrove that's growing in that country is quite resilient. So in a way, because of the resiliency, the pruning and the monitoring was enough, and then the mangrove regenerated properly. But as I mentioned, different countries, they would have different species as well. So definitely we have to do some sort of post monitoring to really look into it and then try to understand what's happening.
Great, thank you.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, please, is it possible to attain 100% or near 100% cleanup?
Return to its original state. That has been an ongoing
condition, to return to its pre-spill condition. Is it possible to attain that? That's
really, that would be a high. That would be really challenging to do, sir. First and foremost, for you to return something to its original state, it means that you have data, you have information of that certain area with regards to its baseline state, right?
Yes, yes.
But normally, or what we have seen so far, some would be lacking the baseline data. So if they lack the baseline data, then it means it would be difficult for you to reach that kind of endpoint. So that's why, as I mentioned earlier, the endpoints with regards to shoreline, these are some sort of things that you should be discussing with the relevant regulators so that you would be, I would say it would be fair to all.
Okay, thank you.
right, I think one more question before we end the webinar. Okay, right, going once, going twice. Right, so the last slide shows my contact. So if you have some questions, feel free to drop a note. And as much as I can, the best I can, I will answer your any queries that you have. So thank you so much for attending this webinar quite early this year. So again, Happy New Year to all, and have a nice day to everyone, and hope to see you soon.